Hello friends and welcome back to Generation Pixel, and if it's the first time you popped along to the channel, well, you picked a splendid time to do so because it's the next episode in the A to ZX of the Spectrum. That's correct, that's more 8-bit microcomputer classics for you to feast your eyes on. And this week, well, it's the 10th episode, so it's the letter J, or J as we say in Scotland, but you want to see them? Then wait until after the titles. Okay, so the first game that I'm going to talk about today is a small game from CRL Software called Juggernaut, and yes, it's a bit unusual because you see this game was released when I was only 12 years old, and I don't think for one moment that CRL expected 12-year-olds to be playing Juggernaut, and that's quite simply because it was a truck simulator. They were obviously looking for maybe an older, more mature market, but even for me at 12 years old, I was already starting to drift away from the more arcadey titles on the home micros. I mean, firstly because the home micros couldn't quite put out the arcade quality that we could experience in the actual arcades, but also because I was drawn much more to simulation games and real-time strategy games and even management games, even at that young age. Now I know Juggernaut's not much to look at by today's standards, but you see this game is one of the earliest examples of this type of game, and it's a game that people play today, whether it be truck simulator, bus simulator or even train simulator. All those modern titles that sell really well today, well, they all have their roots in this game here. Now don't get me wrong, I could barely play this game. It was just a tad too clunky and complicated, but it didn't stop me from trying. And would I recommend anyone playing Juggernaut today? Well, probably not unless you are a big fan of the truck simulators, bus simulators and train simulators, because it might be nice for you to go back and see just where those games came from. Because if software developers didn't take chances in games like this back in the 80s, you probably wouldn't have the games that you play today. So there we have Juggernaut, a game that I played so many hours into and never really got good at, but thoroughly enjoyed every minute of trying to get good at. Second up in the letter J, just purely to emphasise my feelings on arcade ports in the ZX Spectrum, well, I'm going to give us Jackal, Konami's fantastic arcade run and gun or drive and gun from 1986. Now Jackal is a much beloved game in the arcade circuit, and it also had some decent ports on other systems. However, when it came to the ZX Spectrum, well, we had those same old problems. Now although the ZX Spectrum, as it's suggested in its name, was a colourful machine, it didn't manage to handle colours too brilliantly, and I will be the first one to admit that. Now colour clash wasn't a main issue in this game. The main issue in this game was the yellow and black background, which unfortunately managed to bleed and blend into the enemy sprites and of course the enemy weapons, the enemy gunfire. Now anyone who's watched some of the previous footage on games similar to this, such as Akari Warriors, and anyone who's played Commando will absolutely understand what I'm talking about here. Because in a fast-paced arcade run and gun, you need to be able to see where the enemy fire's coming from or you won't stand a chance. Now on top of that, the screen size. Obviously with the limited amount of memory in the ZX Spectrum, well, the screen was squished down into a small central part. And what this did was give you just not enough play area for you to properly see everything that was coming in at you in a game that's travelling at, well, 60 miles per hour. Now is it a terrible port? No, it's not a terrible port. The developers done a fine job of getting what they could of the Jackal arcade game onto the ZX Spectrum. But it did make it brutally hard, and probably just a bit too hard for it to be a comfortable game to play. And not that the game was supposed to be easy, but it did become just a little bit unfair at times. But as with Akari Warriors and Commando, to truly understand the frustration of the limitations of the ZX Spectrum, then you have to play it for yourself. So in this case again, I'm going to say, go and get yourself a copy of this game, emulate it if you must, and experience for yourself the attempt that these developers made at putting this wonderful arcade game onto a 48K microcomputer. Third up is going to be Jak the Nipper, a 1986 game from Gremlin Graphics. Now, this type of game here, well, it was a mainstay of the ZX Spectrum. A type of sort of light platforming game where you have to find objects that will interact with other objects and score points. Now Jack the Nipper, well, it was a bit different because you played as a toddler, as you can see here. And the platforms, well, it was cleverly designed. Instead of just having basic platform levels to jump up, you had items of furniture placed at different parts of the screen to give a pseudo 3D effect. And to avoid the colour clash issues that you have with the ZX Spectrum, well, every screen was monochromatic. It had black and it had a colour, and that was it. But it did give it a lovely sort of cartoon hand-drawn style. Now on to the game itself. Well, the point of Jack the Nipper is, well, to be as naughty as you can be. And to be naughty, you had several options. Firstly, you had your trusty pea shooter, which you would use to shoot the sprites on the screen, who were all enemy sprites. Now if you were to touch any of the sprites on the screen, what would happen is you would get a spanking. And as you can see from the bottom of the screen, what happened was, when you got spanked, you got more rash, and once the rash reached the top of the limit, well, you were all spanked out on that life. But Jack the Nipper had 5 lives, so you had quite a bit to go. Now other ways to be naughty in the game other than just shooting people with your pea shooter, well, you could do things like pick up objects, for example in the museum, drop them and smash them, and that would raise your naughty meter, which was the way it measured your score. Now if you did hit one of the enemy sprites with your pea shooter, they would stop their regular pattern of walking left and right in diagonals and immediately chase Jack the Nipper. And once this happened, your only option was to get right out of that room. But hitting someone with your pea shooter should have been a last option, because what you needed to do in Jack the Nipper was find the special ways to raise your naughty meter. Like most games back in the day, it didn't hold your hand. It wouldn't tell you exactly how to do anything, you would have to work it out yourself. And in Jack the Nipper, well, there were several objects that you could combine with others, which could help you achieve a much higher naughty rating. And it was this type of game mechanic from back in the day that gave the longevity you required in these short 16 or 48k games. Now would I recommend anyone playing Jack the Nipper today? Well, absolutely, because these games were fantastically designed and had puzzles that could keep you stumped for days. So if you do manage to get your hands on a copy of this game or find a way to play it, then definitely give it a go. And especially if it's a Gremlin graphics game, because when they released a game back in the day, well, it was a must have for me. And of course, it's always fun just to be a little bit naughty. Now for the fourth game in the letter J, I bring you From Software's 1984 game Jet Set Willy, which, yes, is a sequel to the absolutely fantastic Manic Miner. Now as you can quite clearly see from the graphics, this is an early platform game. And not just an early platform game, but an early platform game where you don't just need to be pixel perfect, you need to be even better than that. Because the developers of both Manic Miner and Jet Set Willy, well, they had set themselves a task to make a game so brutally hard that you would want to ram your head into a wall. And to be fair, they succeeded. But did that make it any less fun? Absolutely not. Because you see, back then we only had a limited amount of space and memory in our microcomputers, so developers had to come up with a way that would make 10 or so levels last so much longer, and to do that they just made it extremely difficult. Now would I go as far as saying that these games were unfair? Well, no, they weren't unfair, you just had to be completely accurate and completely on time with just about every jump you made, because not only could the enemy sprites kill you, but you could also die from fall damage. So you've got to make sure you're absolutely perfect every time you make every single jump. Now enough about the technicalities of the game. What about the game's storyline? Because this game does have a storyline. As I said, it was a sequel to Manic Miner. Now, after Willy making his fortune by mining, he decides to buy a clifftop mansion, and of course then invite all his friends round to have a massive party. Now the only problem with this is, his friends leave such a mess his Italian maid won't let him into the master bedroom to get some well-earned sleep until he's tidied up the mess himself. And as if this isn't enough of a task in itself, well, there's something else happening in the mansion. The last owner mysteriously disappeared from his laboratory and nobody knows why. But now in the middle of the night when Willy's trying to clean up, his mansion is filled with weird and wonderful creatures, each and every one of them dead set on stopping Willy from tidying up and getting much needed sleep. So if your failure to pull off pixel perfect jumps doesn't kill you, well, the enemy sprites will do that for you. But do I recommend anyone to play Jet Set Willy now and today? And yes, absolutely, you must play these games, both Manic Miner and Jet Set Willy. And would it be difficult for you to play these games? No, because these games are easily downloadable from online sources. So get yourself out there, even if you don't have original software and hardware, and have yourself an experience that you will never forget. Game number 5 in the letter J, and we're going to finish in an absolute bang. We're going to finish with the ultimate published game, Jetpac from 1983. You would probably have to be living under a rock not to know what Jetpac is, and that's despite the fact it is a game from 1983, because I'm sure just about everyone out there who didn't play this on the ZX Spectrum or the microcomputers back in the day have had the opportunity to play it on the rare replay on the Microsoft Xbox systems. Now, for anyone who hasn't played Jetpac and doesn't know the game at all, well, it's simply just one of the best shooters that was released at the time, and you know what, it stands up today. Now, it's not horizontal or vertical scrolling, you are stuck on one screen, and again, for anyone with a little bit of age, you might even consider it an evolution of the classic Atari game Joust. Now, the point of the game is simple. You have to build your spacecraft, and after you build the spacecraft, you have to fill it with fuel, and once you've done that, you jump into your rocket and then blast off into a whole new level. Now, with each progressing level, well, the enemy sprites, they change. They change not only in design and shape, they also change in the patterns that they follow. In the first level, the enemy sprites are merely meteors that travel horizontally from left to right in a descending pattern, which are easy to shoot and avoid. The second level, well, you get the fuzzballs and they'll bounce all over the screen. And later on, you'll get enemies that will even home in on your character. Now, in my humble opinion, this is one of the all-time best high-score shooters that you can play. And I think my words are justified considering you can, yes, play this game on modern systems in its original format, the way it was intended to be played. So if you haven't played Jetpac, then you need to get yourself a copy of this, because there are many ways to play it and get this game played. So there you have it, my friends, another selection of 8-bit masterpieces from the ZX Spectrum. Now, were any of these games you played in the day? Do you recognise them as other games perhaps? Because let's face it, these games either started off like this and then evolved into something else, or maybe they inspired a game that we play today. Any comments then? That's what the comment section's for, and I'm happy and actually love to talk to you guys about anything that you've seen in this video or anything that you want to see in future videos as well. Anyway, thank you for watching, and if you've enjoyed this content, throw me a thumbs up, because well, if you throw me a thumbs up, I know you guys like this content. Also, throw me a thumbs down, because then it lets me know that you guys didn't like this content and maybe I need to think about changing something up, which you can put down in the comments again. And of course, if you want to see more, subscription button always there for you, always free, and you can change your mind at any time you want. So thank you again for watching, and until next time, cheerio.